From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. I'm Erin O'Toole. All right, well, shall we walk down the path?
Let's.
Okay.
This one that I'm seeing right here is musk mustard, this kind of little spiny one, and it's one of our most common plants in like the western urban interface.
For many of us, when we see weeds start to pop up in the yard or the garden, our first instinct is to figure out how to get rid of them. But here's the thing, many plants we might regard as ugly or invasive are, in fact, edible.
So this one right by my foot here is lamb's quarters. It's another very, very common weedy plant, and it's also known as wild spinach.
Okay.
So it's closely related. It's in the same family as spinach. It's also in the same family as quinoa. So the tender greens can be eaten just like spinach. Their flavor is very similar, but a little bit more wild and earthy, which I prefer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Orion Aon learned this in his early years growing up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He would go on camping trips with family and friends who gave him his first lessons in finding food in the wild. Today, he's the owner of a foraging business. Orion started Forage Colorado in 2015, initially as a way to connect with fellow foragers to share stories and knowledge. He teaches clients now how to find and cook up weeds and other plants. Here at In The NoCo, we love to talk to folks with unique businesses, and Orion was kind enough to take me on a foraging lesson along a trail in my neighborhood.
Looking back on it, my dad was taking me or teaching me things about nature my entire life. I was going ice fishing as early as I can remember. I was learning all the trees and plants that grew in my childhood home and around it.
Yeah.
I was climbing a plum tree, and I knew it was a plum tree because my dad taught me that. I was picking sticky pine cones off of pinyon pines and looking for the edible pine nuts because my dad taught me that those were where they came from.
And so tell me a little bit about what your foraging expeditions look like. Is that even what they're called?
Expeditions, classes, forays.
Forays.
Forays is a common word for them, yeah. It's a fun, you think of like foray as like frolicking with a basket or something. That's what comes to my mind. But
Totally.
The classes are very customizable. I've done anywhere from a full 8-hour mushroom hunting day in the woods where we're hiking multiple miles and really getting, back in there looking for what we're trying to find and learning everything. Yeah. Those can be a little overwhelming sometimes for new people, and so I also do classes where I'm just going to someone's house for an hour or 30 minutes and just telling them the handful of plants and usually weeds that are growing around their house and in their garden, that they think are problems and annoying to deal with, but end up actually being free food.
And I mean, right now we're standing in this natural area near my house. I mean, do you see anything at our feet that could be edible?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been walking around and looking at several different species of wild mustards, all of which are edible. We've seen some tumbleweeds, which are edible. I saw a few dandelions earlier, and we just looked at a plant called curly dock that has a bunch of edible parts and is one of the most common weeds, especially in Colorado here.
Yeah. So part of this is finding the plants and part of this is cooking that. I mean, is that something that sort of you were doing right from the start?
No, that was something that I struggled with early on in my foraging career is I know how to identify these things, but what do I do with them? And that's a thing that a lot of new foragers struggle with. And the reason is because these plants, while they're edible, they don't have an easy way to translate that to making food with them. So in a grocery store, we have, mustards and like broccoli and cauliflower that there are recipes for, but the wild counterparts like musk mustard, we don't have recipes for really. And so translating that to common recipes or finding a way to sort of equate that to then make it more approachable is a challenge sometimes.
Yeah. How do you do that?
I like to look for uses in other cultures. So in other parts of the world, they've been using some of these plants for generations. And so they often, if you can find the information, have great resources. You might have to, use Google Translate or dig around and find alternate names for them, which is kind of a fun research project.
Oh, yeah.
Or I like to think about, what does this taste like or what does it look like that's sort of an equivalent? Say like a lamb's quarters that we talked about earlier, which is sometimes called wild spinach. So that's your first hint there, spinach, right? So then you can look up spinach recipes and try lamb's quarters in those, and it'll fit in flawlessly in that instance because it is exactly almost the exact same flavor as spinach.
It's such an adventure. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so foraging, to me, it feels like there could be a little danger, a little risk involved. Because I mean, we were walking through this field and I don't know right off the bat what's edible. How do you make sure that it's safe for your clients?
Yeah, so I always recommend following one basic rule in foraging, and that is never eat any wild food until you're 100% certain of its identification. And it's more about taking your time and learning these plants and becoming comfortable with them and becoming familiar with other ones that might look like them, and really taking your time to learn about them before you start eating them.
Yeah.
We all know what a dandelion looks like because we've grown up with them all around us. We've seen them in commercials, and it's just a plant that our brain knows, almost like a grocery store, plant.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to become that familiar with the wild plants, and then at that point, you're safe to eat them.
Okay. Have you ever stopped someone right before they're about to put something super deadly into their mouth?
I've only had that happen once, and it was sort of just like a very unique circumstance where we were looking at some wild onions, and I had noticed that there was a toxic species growing in them called death camas that is one of the most kind of warned about species when you're talking about wild onions, because it's very toxic, but it looks like an onion because it has those thin leaves. It grows from a bulb like an onion does, but the flowers are quite different. And so as I was explaining, these are wild onions, but look at this plant here, someone had dug one up and it was like making a move to their mouth, and I was like, wait, hold on. So, that's the only time that it's ever happened. The really bad ones usually have a name that suggests it, like death camas or destroying angel, which is a mushroom.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Orion, I want to ask you how you set out to create this foraging community with this business as a community. What are you most proud of when you think about the people that you have worked with?
I think every time I get to see like the spark of like understanding or excitement in someone's eyes when they learn a new plant, maybe one that they've seen every day because it grows in their front yard and they just disregarded it until they learned it was food, and then making that little connection from this is a plant to this is food sort of opens up this whole world of a different appreciation for nature and a different way to look at nature. So instead of seeing just a vast sea of green, you're seeing individual plants, and you know more about them and you care more about them. And that sort of very quick thing that can happen that I see in some people's eyes or their body language when they learn about it is something that never gets old.
Orion, thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Orion Aon runs Forage Colorado. He has tons of articles and videos on how to find and prepare wild foods. KUNC also talked to him last year for a story about how artificial intelligence could change foraging. You'll find links in our show notes. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening. I can't believe I tasted things. I mean, honestly, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I could think about cooking something.
Yeah.
I'd put that in an omelet. It's nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah.